This is another one of those contentious areas. There are those companies that absolutely disclaim anything outside the four walls of the condominium. And then there are other people like myself that think that's ridiculous. If you're looking at, and there's a place where you have to stop. If I'm looking at a 500 unit, a condominium in a 500 unit tower downtown, of course, I mean, looking at the common areas, it would take me a week. Obviously I'm not going to do that. But there are engineering reports that you can access to get that any information about the building. If you're looking at smaller buildings, you absolutely want an inspector that's going to look at the common areas. Maybe not in tight detail, but they should at least be able to look at the masonry, roofing, windows, back porches, safety considerations. If there's a common heating system, you want to know if it's buried in asbestos. If you buy into a condominium, the really big issues that would bury you financially are usually not in the unit. They're the big common elements, the big masonry stuff, that costs lots of money to fix. So if your guy is not looking at all that stuff, you're not getting a real job. And that goes back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago, where if you're looking at a property, I just lost my train of thought here. If you're looking at a property, you have to know how all the parts interrelate. You can't just look at one part of it and think that you have a picture for how the building's going to work. And the split-face block issue. A lot of people bought into split-face block condominium projects. This is a material that we know has serious problems. And when I asked them, what did your inspector look at? They're like, oh no, they just claimed all the exterior. I had no idea that this material was a major problem. All they did was look at, the inside of my unit. Well, the inside of the unit's important. I mean, you want to know if the furnace is safe and all that stuff. But if a furnace breaks, you're looking at a few $1,000s. If something else breaks, it's, an expense that you can handle. If you have to do major masonry repairs, even a small condominium association can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars of repair costs, and which is what's happening right now. I look at an awful lot of condominium buildings in the city of Chicago that have extreme, horrible conditions in the roofing and in the masonry that will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. They're all young people. They have no reserve fund to accommodate those repairs. They don't even know that the repairs are necessary, and they were not informed of them in any way by their inspector. So yeah, so if you're looking at a condo, make sure your guy's going to give the outside and the common areas a once over. And again, everyone's kind of got their limit. I sort of draw the limit at about 30 or 40 units. Once you get bigger than that, I'll take each case, it's on a case-by-case basis. Once you get up into like the 100 units, it's like, wait, no, I'm not looking at the exterior, Well, another area of contention in the home inspection business. There are a multitude of outside vendors, software developers, that are all developing these programs for home inspection reports that, in essence, are these identify conditions, punch a button on the computer, and then the computer kind of generates a boilerplate comment. They're horrible. They also are the reports that most people seem to be using nowadays, because your average home inspector can't seem to write a complete sentence. All of the problems inherent in report writing, well, they all come together in home inspection reports. If you want a competent home inspection report, you want something that is, if it's a long report, it should have a summary sheet. And again, there are those that insist that, no, I will not do a summary. Well, that's usually because their software doesn't do a summary. My own inspection report system, the whole thing is formatted almost as a summary. Okay, look, here are the high points. These are the things that you'd better be thinking about when you're buying these buildings. And I knock them out almost in like a bullet point list. And then all of what I would kind of call the inventory stuff that the state requires us to talk about, like what kind of roof and what's the furnace and what, all the descriptive stuff, I push that to the back because most people don't really care. They don't understand it even if they were to read it. But you want something that summarizes the high points into some kind of coherent form. Photographs. At this point, you got to have photographs in your report. And again, like everything else, everyone argues about how many photographs. In my own reports, I use photographs maybe for every comment. I might have at least one and sometimes 2 and 3 pictures of any comment that I make. And I take pictures from different angles with big red arrows pointing at the thing. Because most people, they don't have the time or the inclination to learn all the terms or to, most people are not going to understand even a simply written statement about houses because they don't know any of the terms. It's much better to have a nice big picture with a red arrow pointing at the condition with a simple statement describing what they're looking at and what it means. And if you're really doing your job, you should also tell people what to do about it. And that doesn't mean that you're engineering the solution, but it should be very clear that, look, this thing needs repair, it needs repair now, it needs an engineer or an architect or a heating contractor or somebody to fix it, so. They're almost always related to water. And then one statistic that came out a few years ago was the top item, at least in kind of what I would call the northeast quadrant of the metro area, were underperforming HVAC systems, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. Because again, that's another one of those things in new construction. Architects and contractors hate HVAC systems because they take up valuable square footage. So they push them off into the corner someplace and open up the living area, but as a consequence, they end up with heating systems that don't work very well. So, but the number one, bar none, the thing that costs the most to fix and 7 of the 10 most common defects in new construction are caused by water. Either as leaks in the basement, leaks in the walls, water vapor issues. In new construction has a completely different set of issues than old buildings. Old buildings were built with old growth timber. They were leaky, drafty. Old growth timber doesn't rot. Moisture was not contained or retained in old structures. In new construction, everything is plastics and resins and sawdust pressed into panels. It's all engineered, manufactured lumber. Windows are tight. Everything's got vinyl in it. Paints have vinyl. I mean, nothing breathes. Everything, there's no vapor transference at all in new construction. If the builder is not fully aware of all of the ramifications of all these different materials that they're putting together, if they aren't very competent in understanding the vapor transmission characteristics of these structures, you can end up with mold factories. And, like the sick building syndrome, this is not a mystery to anybody in my line of work. New buildings have all kinds of issues, and they largely have to do with moisture control, moisture management. And then if you kind of put the two things that we just talked about, if you have poor moisture control, poor ventilation, poor moisture management with an underperforming heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, you've got real problems. So, and I get to see some of those problems, and some of them are profound. And to the point where you can't fix them. And this actually goes to a whole area of study called building science. Building science is actually a degreed program at major engineering schools. It studies many things, but foremost among them is the study of water in new structures. How does it move? How does it get in? How do we get it back out? Interestingly, almost no architects or builders are aware of all the elements of building science. It's not taught in architecture schools.
Strange, yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's not, and it's only recently being adopted into some of the architectural schools. It has absolutely nothing to do with any builder's education. And everybody charges in and just builds stuff, and then we find out a couple years later that, oh, gee whiz, you created this little sponge that collects moisture and doesn't let it back out again. So, all the big problems, the most expensive problems, they're always about water. And when people ask me to do a new construction inspection, they often say, well, what are you going to look at? It's a new house. And I say, well, we're going to look at water and how it might get in and how the structure might accommodate it or not. And so it's always about water.